Okay, next will be the first hearing of House Bill 1071, ranked choice voting in nonpartisan elections. Representatives Arndt and Chairman Kennedy, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. First of all, I will just announce that Mr. Dudley is going to be distributing 3 amendments to you, but we will wait until the amendment phase to really get into those because they are not really undermining the substance of the bill. So we're excited to bring forward this bill today to talk to you guys about ranked choice voting in Colorado. If you're not familiar with this voting method, it is exactly what it sounds like. You have multiple candidates on the ballot, you rank them in order of your preference. Here's my first choice, here's my second choice, here's my third choice. And if no one gets 50% of the vote on the first round, then the person who gets the fewest votes is dropped off, and then their second choice votes are reallocated to someone else until they get to 50%. This is a voting method that's been much discussed by a number of groups exploring different kinds of alternative voting methods across the country. And I'll tell you why this piqued my interest. In my suburb of Lakewood, it is pretty easy to get on the ballot for city council. You need 25 signatures to get on the ballot. And so it's pretty common that we have 3 or 4 or more candidates running. And in those scenarios, it's very common that the person who wins has 30-something or 40-something% of the vote, but rarely do they get a majority of the vote. So I've seen this as a solution for a long time for the cities to help them explore this option. Now, I want to be clear that this is already something that cities have the authority to do in Colorado. It's within their existing statutory authority for both home rule and statutory cities. But here's the problem. It's not possible for the county clerks to help them. That's where the barrier is in state law. County clerks are bound to only use standard plurality voting. So what we're trying to do with this bill is make it more possible for cities to use the right that they already have by having the Secretary of State promulgate rules, designate software, test software, come up with new audit processes to make sure that cities are actually fully empowered to use this authority that they already have.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I started running for office in 2014, and someone came up to me and thumped me on the chest and said, rank choice voting. His name was Ken Tharp, and I want to give him all the kudos. I was new. I had just quit my job to run for office, and I had to look it up. I've always felt like it was a really great idea, and sometimes ideas come sooner and sometimes they come later. So the League of Women Voters, of which I am a member, is in big support of ranked choice voting. And I am too, and here's why I like it. I am always a fan of hearing every single voice. And in a race where there's not just multiple, but the key is more than 2, right? So 3 or more, right? The person who eventually wins comes in with 50% or 0.1, at least, percent of the will of the people, okay? It also adds to civility. So I've listened to a lot of podcasts where the cities that have opted in do it. Maine also has ranked choice voting. And I have a friend who's a legislator there too. It adds to civility because the candidates they tend to it's not binary. It's not either or, right? And then also when you're talking to the constituents, right? If you're not their first choice, shoot, you might be their second, right? You're going to hang in there, talk to them, hear what they want to say. If someone says, "I'm not voting for you," right? So now we tend to say, okay, and then we move on. When someone said, "I might vote for you," or "You could be my second," "Oh, tell me more. What do you care about?" So I think it gives the constituents a bigger voice. It allows each person to come in with 50% or more of the people behind them, and it lends us civility between the candidates themselves.
Chairman Kennedy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. One thing I will also add is that for cities that currently use a runoff election, this has the possibility of saving them money, because doing instant runoff through ranked choice voting is just one ballot, saving them the entire cost of the second election. So I don't know how many jurisdictions do that in Colorado, but there's certainly some, and this is a money saver for them if they chose to use this method.
Representative Arndt.
And my final point is I really feel like this is the Colorado way. It's not mandated. It's 100% optional. We're setting up a framework, as Representative Kennedy said, to make this a stronger possibility. And ranked choice voting can be opted in by municipalities either by a vote of the city council or by a vote of the people, whatever they choose. this further strengthens what we humbly think is one of the best voting systems in the United States of America. And just as another option.
All right, thank you, representatives. Are there any questions from the committee? Representative Geithner.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair, and for the sponsors. So I appreciate the sentiment that you just added, Representative Art, that it's Colorado way because it doesn't mandate anything. I appreciate that. And I was aware that ranked choice voting is already in statute, I think as early as 2008, I think when that was adopted. But my question has to do with some of the literature that I've received in the emails that I've received. So some of the literature that I received that was an information piece to support the bill, and then emails that I've received alludes to the cost savings I think that you both referenced in a potential runoff. One of those that was highlighted was approximately $550,000, I think, for the city of Colorado Springs. Does that look familiar?
Representative Art.
I just want to make sure I had the figure correct. So I know that this bill pertains to coordinated elections, and coordinated elections tend to be off years, and they tend to be in November. And so my question really has to do with the representation that kind of conveys, that sentiment. So Colorado Springs, for anyone that doesn't know that might be listening, actually does their elections in April of the odd year. So it doesn't fall in the category of a coordinated election, right? And so I guess if we're using information that is really not applicable to try and persuade folks to support, it can seem a little misleading. And so I was just wondering if you guys were aware that Colorado Springs by charter actually, so there would need to necessarily be a charter change in order to have ranked choice voting in a coordinated election anyways as part and to have an impact on this bill. Right now, I don't think that there's any impact that this has specifically on Colorado Springs. And so I was just wondering if you could comment on that. And I'm not sure if you've had the opportunity to talk to Colorado Springs and where they are, but just curious to find out a little bit more about your communications with Colorado Springs.
Representative Kennedy.
Thank you, Representative Woodrow. Thank you, Representative Geithner. We have spoken with the Municipal League. We have not spoken individually with every city in Colorado. My understanding was that our intent was to make sure that any city can opt into this. And so if we need to tweak the language to make sure that this is also an option for Colorado Springs, we're very willing to do that. We're not trying to close off any cities from making this choice. So, and we weren't trying to be misleading by putting the cost savings in the amendment here. So I'm happy to dig into this a little bit more and make sure that our definition covers May elections as Colorado, or is it April that Colorado Springs does theirs?
Representative Geithner.
Appreciate that. And just to be clear, like I've spoken with Colorado Springs, they have no interest in the bill or changing what they currently do or the way in which they do it. I just found it to be a little misleading if we're presenting information as something that could somewhat be persuasive when it's not exactly accurate. So.
Okay, are there any other questions from the committee? Seeing none, we'll move on to the witness testimony phase. Please remember, witnesses, all testimony will be timed and each witness will be given a maximum of 3 minutes. Representatives, do you have a preference as to how we go about witnesses?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I actually wrote you some notes on the sheet I left up there for you. So I thought we would kind of try to alternate between support and opposing witnesses. And then I do know we have a time constraint on Boulder Mayor Sam Weaver.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. I thought that this was just a love note to me, so I apologize. So thank you. Moving to the witness testimony phase, we'll start with Emma Donahue.
And Mr. Chair, I believe she has one other witness from her organization who's also here in person. Maybe the two of them could be a panel to start.
Certainly, if Thomas Alley is also present, please come up as well. Here we go. That's one. Now I get it. Okay. To the 6? Do you use this thing? Do you turn this thing on? Good afternoon, Ms. Donahue.
Hello.
The floor is yours.
Thank you. My name is Emma Donahue. I'm the political director for Ranked Choice Voting for Colorado. We are a statewide nonprofit organization that is working to promote ranked choice elections throughout the state, through municipalities, and at the county level. We are here today because we are in very strong support of this bill to expand ranked choice voting here in Colorado and allow counties to coordinate the election for municipalities. In November of last year, the city of Boulder voted overwhelmingly 78% to start electing their mayor using ranked choice voting in 2023. In order for Boulder to successfully run that election in 2023, they need to be able to coordinate with the county of Boulder, who runs their elections for them. So this bill would allow the county of Boulder to continue to run the municipal elections for the city of Boulder along with other county elections, and would simplify the process, allowing voters to only get one ballot and not have to have a multiple system that will cost the city and the county more money. Boulder doesn't currently have a runoff system, so they would not see the runoff savings, but they would have the savings of keeping the elections together. There are other cities here in Colorado that have started looking at the possibilities of moving to a ranked choice vote for their municipalities. Denver is currently debating that in their charter review committee, and so is the city and county of Broomfield. So we would like to support this bill because it will open a system that will allow the counties to run the coordinated elections and for us to keep our secure, safe election system going. It would create one set of rules by the SOS, one audit system, one set of everything, so that every county has the same resources and is running everything exactly the same, so that we know that it's being handled correctly. So that is a big reason why we support this as being at a statewide level, so that everybody is getting the same information and the same resources at once. We also really support this legislation because it does expand and include more people in the process. You get to have a greater understanding of where you are on the candidates. It allows you to really define who you like, who you're okay with, and who you're not, who's kind of your last choice, which really gives voters a more say. This system helps prevent vote splitting and spoiler effects because people have to pick a candidate that may not be their first choice just because they have a higher likelihood of winning. This system also brings more women and people of color to the table in RCV elections. We see that more women and people of color run and win in these systems. And so we see it as a strong way of using more inclusion in the community. Ranked choice voting has been used in several cities to actually fix their election problems where they were not getting good equity of their city councils and legislative bodies, and ranked choice voting was actually used to fix it and stop a federal American Votes lawsuit against cities. So there is proof out there that this has shown to be more inclusive, more quality, and really gives voters a better satisfaction in their voting system. Currently, Basalt and Telluride have both used ranked choice voting here in Colorado. Surveys we did after that showed that around 90 to 95% of those voters were satisfied, found easy, and enjoyed using a ranked choice voting system over a regular plurality system. And, you know, for counties like Denver who do use a runoff system, it would save them about $1 million every election by not having to run the second runoff ballot. It also would put Denver in compliance with the Militaries and Overseas Act. Currently, Denver cannot mail out and get back ballots in time for the runoff election for military and overseas voters. So this would solve many problems for cities and counties and not just help voters have their voice heard. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Donahue. Mr. Alley. And can you please make sure you state your full name and who you represent for the record?
Yes, my name is Dr. Thomas Alley. I am a resident of Broomfield. I am also a volunteer. Does that work? Oh, sorry. I'm also a volunteer as the board president for RCV for Colorado. My background is that of a physicist. I'm also a retired lieutenant colonel in the Air Force. And I just want to give you a little personal view of why I support RCV. When I served for the Air Force, I thought I was protecting America and keeping the world safe from democracy. That was kind of a prime objective. I think America suffers a bit from being safe for, not safe from democracy, but safe for democracy. And I think America suffers a bit from that because of our election system. Our current election system drives polarization. It's a fact that the vote splitting that occurs in spoiled elections that occur actually push extremes to both sides in our two-party system. Ranked choice voting can mitigate that. There's no more vote splitting. There's no more spoiled elections. You get to rank your preference. You get a more fair election because you have a majority threshold, making it more likely that you come out with a majority mandate. Instead of having representation by the minority, we have representation for the majority. And I think that makes a much fairer democratic system, and we're making Colorado and America safe for democracy in that matter. Here in Colorado, the localities that want to adopt it are a bit frustrated because of the coordination they need to do with the county. And they can't get that help. They don't have rules from the Secretary of State. So places that want it see the logistics that they can't adopt it. With this bill, that goes a long way to setting the rules, doing the audits, doing the certification of software that already exists out there. And it makes it much more likely that places that want it can adopt it. Broomfield is considering it where I live, and they would not want to adopt it on their own. They've seen that Boulder has voted it in. Denver's considering it, and these places see it as a lot of people on the council there see it as a favorable thing. And I would ask that you give it a thumbs up and make Colorado safe for democracy.
Great, thank you so much. Are there any questions for the witnesses from the committee? Seeing none, thank you. We'll next call up remotely Sam Weaver. Mr. Weaver, are you there?
Oh, can you hear me now?
We can, Mr. Weaver. You have the floor.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Vice Chair Woodrow and members of the committee. My name is Sam Weaver, and I'm the mayor of the city of Boulder. And on behalf of the city, I respectfully request your support for House Bill 1071. I appreciate Representative Kennedy's efforts to bring forward this bill. I know he did not have Boulder in mind when he began working on it, but as it so happens, it meets a very specific need that our city has. Last year, over 78% of our voters approved Measure 2E, and its passage means that starting in 2023, our system of electing the mayor will change from one where the mayor is chosen by the city council to one where they are directly elected by the voters using ranked choice voting. The measure had started off as a citizen initiative, but was subsequently reworked with council input and then submitted to our voters by a majority of our council members. As used to elect a representative to a single seat, the mayor, our election will rely on a form of ranked choice voting called instant runoff voting, or IRV. Proponents argue that it is preferable to the plurality or winner-take-all system, which can produce a spoiler effect, leaving minority viewpoints underrepresented and contributing to pressure on voters to cast ballots for those they think might win rather than those who they really desire. These are all problems that RCV is designed to address. I personally was not among the initial supporters of this change, but I have since come to see it as an important first step to educate our voters on what ranking their vote means and to prepare them to use this form of voting to elect all 9 of our city council members. It is in these multi-seat elections where I believe ranked choice voting could be the most useful. I understand this bill does not currently allow for use in multi-seat elections, and I understand the reasons for that. Just like the supporters of Measure 2E, I agree that when we reform our electoral system, for all the good reasons that exist, we should do so slowly, incrementally, and very carefully. While House Bill 1071 was not introduced for Boulder, its drafting elegantly addresses the challenges our city faces in holding a coordinated election within our county using ranked choice voting. Our county clerk has told us that to hold such an election, her office will need to receive express authority and guidance from the state, in addition to support for purchasing and certifying the necessary voting technology. This bill would provide just those needs. Of course, our city could proceed to hold this election on its own. However, like most cities, we do not have the same expertise, resources, or experience in running elections that our county does. Would it be legal and possible for our city to hold such an election? Yes. Would it be a good idea? No, it would not. In fact, I fear it could result in an expensive election that would confuse our voters and discourage ranked choice voting from being tried elsewhere. If it was only our city that needed state support to act, it might not make sense to move forward with this measure. However, as Representative Kennedy will attest, the interest in reforming our electoral process runs far and deep throughout Colorado, indeed throughout the country. The supporters seek a system that provides greater choice and a stronger voice. I share their view. After you have had an opportunity to consider House Bill 1071, I hope you will too. Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair and members of the committee. I'm available to try and answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Are there any questions for Mayor Weaver? Seeing none, thank you so much. All right, next up, we'll call Chuck Browerman. Mr. Browerman, are you available?
Can you hear me? This is Chuck Browerman.
Hi, Mr. Browerman. The floor is yours. 3 minutes.
All right.
Please introduce yourself and state who you represent for the record.
Sure. Vice Chair Woodrow, Chairman Kennedy, and members of the State Civic, Veterans, and Military Affairs Committee. My name is Chuck Browerman. I am the El Paso County Clerk and Recorder. I oppose this bill as a matter of public policy. Ranked choice voting, also known as instant runoff voting, is an electoral system that adds more confusion to the voting process while failing to ensure that every vote counts. As a guide, voting should be easy, clear-cut, and accessible as possible and allow the greatest swath of voter participation as possible. House Bill 1071, ranked choice voting in nonpartisan elections, fails to meet that test. The proponents of 1071 make some lofty claims regarding the benefits of ranked choice voting, that it increases the likelihood that the winner will have a majority of the votes cast, that it will decrease negative campaigning, and that it will increase voter turnout. With respect to ensuring a candidate wins a majority, a recent study from the Maine Heritage Group surveyed 96 ranked choice voting elections from around the country and found that only in 38% of the elections did the winning candidate have a majority. To the point that ranked choice voting presents a solution to nasty or negative campaigns, while candidates under ranked choice voting may temper their rhetoric in hopes of being some voters' number two choice, it still leaves the door wide open for third-party organizations to fill that negative messaging gap and get away with it. For example, in Maine's 2018 gubernatorial primary and in the 2020 U.S. Senate race where ranked choice voting was used, there was a clear increase in the number of third-party groups, the amount of money spent, and on the divisive rhetoric that existed between the groups, and it was unchecked. On the statement of increasing voter turnout, Colorado enjoys some of the highest voter turnout in the country. However, under ranked choice voting, overall voter turnout has not increased. In fact, it has decreased. In a study by Cato, they examined voter turnout in 5 San Francisco elections from 1995 to 2011, and they found it exacerbated the differences in voter turnout between those that were likely to vote and those who may not, which included younger and those voters with lower educational attainment. Mr. Chairman and Mr. Vice Chair, while states and localities have used ranked choice voting, the findings all show that one thing: voters feel that at the end of the day, their vote doesn't count. Research has shown that ranked choice voting increases the prevalence of spoiled or exhausted votes. Understanding the differences in policy between candidates to the point where a voter can meaningfully rank all candidates in order of preference requires a great deal of political savvy and engagement. However, a number of jurisdictions have implemented and tested ranked choice voting, but have since repealed the complicated system. For example, Burlington, Vermont, they adopted it in 2005 and repealed it in 2010. Other jurisdictions that tested and repealed ranked choice voting include state of North Carolina, Pierce County, Washington, Ann Arbor, Michigan. A similar response was seen in Aspen, Colorado. The city used ranked choice voting for the first time in 2009, but was quickly rejected by voters in 2010 by 65%. It's clear that voters overwhelmingly prefer their traditional voting system of one person, one vote over the convoluted ranked choice voting system. Before we make big changes, I hope this committee will consider these points and the shortcoming of ranked choice voting. In closing, there's no need to complicate the straightforward voting process we currently employ by adopting ranked choice voting. As clerks, we already field hundreds of questions from voters during election conducting the traditional voting method. It is reasonable to assume that voters will have even more questions if we change the way to vote. Voting should be as simple and easy as possible for voters and election administrators. Each citizen should have one vote and every vote should count. But with a system like ranked choice voting, voters could lose their say. I thank you and entertain any questions the committee may have.
Thank you, Mr. Berman. Are there any questions for this witness? Representative Bockenfeld.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for being here today, Mr. Berman. According to the fiscal note, the cost of ranked choice voting will be passed on to the municipalities, but being a former county commissioner, a lot of counties, I think, go in and just split up the cost of an election and on a pro rata basis, allocate costs back contractually to the cities and other government entities. Is there a fiscal issue here on what the cost would be, and is that cost being shared by everyone on the ballot, or can the actual cost be applied back specifically to the municipality that wants to use this form of voting? Can you talk about the fiscal aspects from a clerk and recorder's standpoint, I guess is what I'm asking.
Mr. Browerman.
Sure, Representative Bockenfeld. I do think there will be costs that will be bared by the county. We do it on a pro rata basis. We have in the past. If we wanted to parse out that we would have to do that with great care. However, there's always other ancillary costs with an election. It's the increased number of phone calls. It's the increased real estate on a ballot. To explain that, I know from seeing things in Maine where this was a process. They had to publish a 16 to 18 page voter instruction guide as to how that voting method is utilized. We would also have concerns as county clerks is we would have races that might have ranked choice voting on it and races that would not. For instance, a school board race may use the traditional method, or another community that is on the ballot may use traditional. And that'll create a lot of voter confusion. They'll be contacting our offices, asking questions that will require more people to answer those phone calls. We increase the amount of publishing cost in voter guides. It also would cost citizens that their voice would be not heard, because how would they differentiate between which race may or may not have the ranked choice voting? I think it adds to confusion, it adds to alienation, and adds to costs. Even if it could be appropriated by the entity, I think it would still add some ancillary costs to counties.
Are there any other questions for this witness? All right, seeing none, thank you very much, Mr. Browerman. We'd like to next call Judd Choate.
All right.
Good afternoon, Mr. Choate. Can you hear us?
Yeah, I think so. Can you guys hear me?
We can.
Great. Thank you, Vice Chair Woodrow and members of the committee, for allowing me the opportunity to testify My name is Judd Chode. I'm the state election director. I work at the Colorado Secretary of State's office. Our office supports the idea of alternative voting methods and would like to thank Chair Kennedy for his leadership in this space. The Secretary of State's office welcomes this exploration of different ways to ensure Coloradans' preferences are heard at the ballot box. I'm testifying today to provide some insight into the technical aspects implicated by this proposal and to raise some concerns that the Department of State has in the implementation of this legislation. While we support the exploration of alternative voting methods, we must balance the desire for innovation with the need to implement any changes thoughtfully and carefully to uphold the integrity of our election system. Implementing instant runoff voting, as outlined in HB 21-1071, would require a significant overhaul to many key components of Colorado's election system, including adoption of technical standards and requirements for ranked choice voting, successful testing of ranked voting applications, development of a first-in-the-nation centralized instant runoff voting aggregation system for municipal IRV races that cross county lines, development of Colorado's electronic ballot delivery system for military and overseas voters, as well as for voters with disabilities, improvements to our election night reporting system, and a rework to Colorado's first-in-the-nation risk-limiting audit software. Individually, each of these updates presents significant undertaking for our office. These systems are interdependent, so it takes time to work out any bugs that may exist and how these technologies communicate and interact. We would be the first state in the nation to do much of what is outlined in this bill. For instance, there is no election software vendor in the United States that has an existing software package to allow us to execute a risk-limiting audit for both instant runoff voting contests as well as traditional plurality voting contests. While we are confident we can make these improvements, what gives us pause is that the current bill's timeline for implementation is tight. We appreciate conversations with Chair Kennedy to explore alternative options that would allow our office more time to administer the IRV contest and look forward to continuing those conversations. If this bill were advanced without amendment to extend the implementation timeline, our office would have roughly 18 months to deliver a substantial multi-component overhaul of our election system. The timeline to do this significant work is exceptionally tight, especially given the need to go through state procurement processes. Also, I'd like to mention that although Secretary Griswold supports exploring alternative voting methods, she expressed concern at the prospect of raising fees on small business owners in the middle of a pandemic to pay for instant runoff voting as outlined in this legislation. If the legislation moves forward, we request that the timeline of the bill be adjusted and the cost covered by the General Assembly. We are committed to continuing this conversation to ensure that we can deliver instant runoff voting in a way that will be secure and trusted. Thank you for inviting me to testify for this important legislation, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Choate. Are there any questions for this witness from the committee members? Representative Bockenfeld.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Choate, can you expand upon your statement about the fees that would be associated with small businesses that they would have to pick up?
Mr. Choate.
Well, Representative Bockenfeld, we turned in a fiscal note of about $1 million to make the changes necessary to allow for IRV voting. And the way that the Colorado Secretary of State's office runs, the funds that we run on, are filing fees for Colorado businesses. So those filing fees would serve as the basis for that increased coverage. I think the proposal in our office is we don't have $1 million right now to be able to dedicate to those improvements. So we would probably need to raise fees in order to cover those additional costs.
Thank you. Are there any further questions for the witness? Seeing none, thank you very much, Mr. Choate. We'd like to next call up Kieran Harlos, who's appearing remotely.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can, Ms. Harlows. Please state your name and who you represent for the record.
Okay, certainly. My name is Karen Ann Harlos. I'm not here representing anyone, but as a side note, I am the National Secretary for the Libertarian Party. And I am here speaking in favor, and I have to say that I'm a little bit alarmed at some of the comments, and I'm not going to go over the common items in support. What I want to go over is some of the things that had been said. Some people are arguing against as if this proposal will decide whether it can be used or not, and that is not what's on the table. What's on the table is whether the state of Colorado is going to assist voters in what they've already decided on the local level that they want. The purpose of the state of Colorado should not be a stumbling block. It should be setting up the lower governments for success. All that will happen if this doesn't go through is that you are hobbling the activists and the voters who have already made a decision. And it should be their decision to make, and they should expect Colorado to facilitate that for them. I'm also concerned about some of the comments that were made about Aspen, because I do think there's some muddying of the waters here. I really encourage people to read Ballot Access News and the Aspen Daily news from February 19th, 2009, where it is dealing with a multi-winner race, not a single winner race, and they decided to use a disfavored and obscure method of counting, not the one that is recommended by the major RCV organizations. So I do believe that was somewhat of a red herring. And last thing here, I'm probably going to be involved in petitioning with Castle Rock, so yet another municipality may come on board. And we want the support of the state of Colorado. I don't believe it's the job of legislatures to kill things into committee, but to let the voters decide what they would like to do with their votes. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Harlows. Are there any questions from the committee for this witness? Seeing none, the next witness is Desmond Wallington.
Okay, I got a weird beeping. Okay. Thank you so much for letting me speak today on behalf of Ranked Choice Voting. I am also on the executive board for Ranked Choice Voting for Colorado with Tom and Emma. And I do want to follow up with what Karen Ann was talking about when some of the examples that was previously given with ranked choice voting being repealed, particularly in Ann Arbor, Michigan. Ranked choice voting was used in one mayoral election in Ann Arbor, Michigan in the early 70s. And during that time frame, there were 3 political parties in that city that were pretty active: the Democrats, Republicans, and the Human Right Party. And what Ann Arbor adopted ranked choice voting so there wouldn't be any vote splitting. So what ended up happening was they had 2 African American candidates running against the Caucasian candidate, and the black vote ended up splitting, and the instant runoff voting ended up in the city adopting or electing an African American mayor. And there was an opposition campaign against the white people in the city, and they repealed it on an off-year election, kind of in a throwaway election in the middle of the summer. So I just wanted to kind of clarify as to previous reasons why ranked choice voting has been repealed. And one of the benefits of ranked choice voting is that it does more people of color and more women win and run under ranked choice voting than under traditional plurality voting. As a resident of Denver, Colorado, I support ranked choice voting because it would bring our city in compliance with the Uniformed and Overseas Citizens Absentee Voting Act, or UACOVA. And so currently right now, the city of Denver cannot, we actually disenfranchise our military members. And this is the House State Civic, Military, and Veterans Affairs Committee, because it we have a small 1-month window in between the election and the runoff election. And if you're a military member living in serving your country in a rural part or a rural part of the globe, we cannot print you a ballot and get it back in time for your vote to count. So, ranked choice voting would bring Denver into compliance with that. It would bring a lot of the cities in Colorado who have that majority requirement into compliance. So that is my testimony, and thank you for having me.
Thank you very much, Mr. Wallington. Are there any questions from the committee for this witness? Seeing none, thank you, Mr. Wallington. We next call up Gathia Weiss.
Hello?
Ms. Weiss, yes, can you please state your name and who you
Yes,
represent for the
I
record?
was just making sure my microphone was on. Yes, my name is Gathia Weiss, and I am representing the League of Women Voters of Colorado. Good afternoon to the members of committee, and thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today. The League urges you to support this bill, HB 21-1071, which we see as serving an important step in improving our voting methods. The League supports authorizing and implementing alternatives to plurality voting that allow people to express their preferences more effectively. Instant runoff ranked choice voting is one method that is a clear improvement over plurality voting. This method promotes honest voting. It allows voters to meaningfully support their preferred candidate without the risk that their candidate serves as a vote-splitting spoiler. Allowing voters to be more fully express their opinions should lead to greater participation in and engagement with elections. This bill gives municipalities key support in implementation of instant runoff ranked choice elections. The League of Women Voters has a deep commitment to voter outreach and education, and we will be eager to serve as a resource in enabling the successful implementation of the provisions of this bill in municipalities choosing an instant runoff ranked choice election option. And we urge your support for this legislation.
Thank you, Ms. Weiss. Are there any questions from the committee for this witness? Seeing none, thank you so much. Next up is Heather Stauffer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can you hear me?
We can. Please introduce yourself, state your name, and who you represent for the record.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. My name is Heather Stauffer, and I'm here on behalf of the Colorado Municipal League and our 270 municipal members in support of House Bill 1071. I want to first just thank Representative Kennedy and Representative Arndt for their work on this bill. We appreciate being included in the stakeholder process and having the ability to give feedback. As you know, Colorado is a local control state, and as such, municipal elections are autonomous from the state as a matter of purely local concern. Title 31 and Title I statutes currently allow both statutory and home rule municipalities the option of using either plurality or ranked choice voting methods in municipal elections. We appreciate that this bill preserves our local control by continuing to leave the choice of voting methods to the municipalities themselves. In recent decades, many home rule municipalities have opted to contract with counties to conduct their elections, and therefore, as a practical matter, we believe that allowing counties the ability to conduct alternative voting methods in coordinated elections will support these municipalities who are interested in using the voting methods. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Ms. Stauffer. Are there any questions from the committee for this witness? Seeing none, thanks so much. The next witness we'd like to call up is Councilman Juan Marcano. Mr. Marcano, are you there?
I am. Can you hear me?
We sure can.
All right, wonderful.
Please state your name. Please state your name and who you represent for the record.
All right, thank you so much. My name is Juan Marcano, and I represent Ward 4 on the Aurora City Council, but I am here before you today speaking just for myself. So good afternoon, Vice Chair Woodrow and members of the committee. As I said, my name is Juan Marcano and I represent Ward 4 on the Aurora City Council. And I am joining you today to speak in support of House Bill 1071. I'd like to begin by expressing my gratitude to Representative Kennedy, Representative Arndt, and Senator Fenberg for bringing this forward. Ranked choice voting is an important electoral reform whose time has come. This is a topic that is of interest to more and more of Aurora's residents with each passing election. Many of our municipal races in Aurora are decided via plurality rather than majority winners. Our at-large races are often won with folks having less than a quarter of the vote, and our 2019 mayoral race was won with just over a third of the vote, and even some single winner ward level races are sometimes won with as little as a third of the vote. So put another way, we have a record of seating candidates who had more people vote for someone else. The process that is used in ranked choice voting is something that people already do when deciding what to eat for dinner, what movie to watch, what cereals to purchase, etc. And it's something that I believe will easily transfer to our representative democracy. I've participated in several beer tastings, pizza tastings, cookie tastings, and so on to demonstrate how the process works. And in each of these instances, support has been overwhelmingly positive. So what is preventing us here in Aurora from adopting ranked choice voting is that our counties, Aurora spans 3 counties, they're not currently able to collaborate and help count these ballots. So that's one of the big parts of this bill, and I'm very, very excited that this is actually coming forward, as it's one of the major hurdles that is standing before Aurora exploring whether this is a good fit for the city. So it is my hope that the committee moves this bill to the committee of the whole with unanimous support in the interest of good governance. And I just want to thank you all for allowing me to speak today.
Thank you, Councilman Marcano. Any questions from the committee for this witness? Seeing none, thanks so much. Next, we'd like to call up Justin Kurth.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, members of the committee. My name is Justin Kurth. I'm a resident out of Penrose, Colorado, and I'm here to represent the 3,200 supporters in Colorado of an organization that I've been volunteering with as a state leader called Stand Up Republic. Stand Up Republic is a 501c4 nonprofit focused on advocating for government reforms, fighting for accountable government, electoral reform, healthy media, and pluralistic society. As of late, I've been hearing some pretty good supportive comments on House Bill 1071, which I'm here also to support. Several of them I was going to touch on, so rather than duplicate that, I want to just hone in on a few here. One moment of concern real quick is that I take it from the El Paso County Clerk that there are concerns about call volume. And as a former emergency dispatcher, I can certainly relate that that call volume does tend to be a consideration as part of job duties and how much that call volume impacts your staffing. So while those concerns are there, I think still there is nonetheless a duty to the citizens of El Paso County, let alone the rest of the state and their counties. Why now, and why some of the distrust, that we've heard kind of come across from some of the opponents on this? I cannot really think of a more apt exercise to instill confidence in our elections than now, than voting, or rather than a voting method that removes barriers like spoiler guilt, or the opposite side of that coin, the hold your nose effect, because right now that's why many people aren't voting, or they would rather not participate, is because they would rather not have to fuss with either of those two concerns. I mean, how many opt-out folks are we missing out on as votes go because they just can't stomach what they're being asked to do with the options they have available? I think waiting to innovate in the area of elections can easily be understood as something that would, well, let me rephrase that. I think waiting to innovate something voters can easily understand, which also instills more confidence in election processes and reduces polarization. Waiting to innovate that will be the thing that would cause more distrust in an election system. Bipartisan reform efforts to improve elections, like the independent commission that came out, unanimously out of the legislature and was well supported, overwhelmingly supported by the public, are things that actually bind together the electorate. To the point about sometimes that they think opponents may think that this is a confusing voting method. I don't understand where we ought to sell the people short on their capacity to understand something like picking a movie to rent or to stream, because on weekends, my family, we choose whichever the people in that moment, whichever most would like to watch. We don't just go and say, the one person that wanted to watch one movie, we're going to watch that one. No, we go with what the people voted for the most. If there's concerns about, I think, the ballot design, the real estate of the ballots, that is a function of the Secretary of State and the clerks to basically break down that that design to make sure that it's the most efficient design possible for the most, for the least amount of money possible. So it shouldn't be written off as a reason why not to use when it's part and parcel with present duties that Secretaries of State and clerks already accomplish. On another note, there are voter satisfaction surveys, recent ones out of Basalt, that show an over 90% approval of either easy or very easy use in their mayoral election not too long ago. There are peer-reviewed voter satisfaction and peer-reviewed supports regarding disenfranchisement. And what I mean by supporting disenfranchisement, I mean to say that the conclusive evidence is that there will not be any additional or any disenfranchisement by communities of color when ranked choice is implemented. That's a very recent, I think 2020 October study.
Mr. Kurth, I'd let you go about 2 minutes over. If you could wrap it up, it'd be greatly appreciated.
Absolutely. Oh, I appreciate that. I'm sorry. Thank you. One last question is, if there's anybody willing to answer where the HAVA, the Help America Vote Act funds would be contributed to the Secretary of State's office to make this happen. And thank you all for your time.
Great, thanks so much. Are there any questions from the committee for this witness? Seeing none, thank you, Mr. Kurth. I'd like to call up next Karen Goldman.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Goldman. Can you please state your name and who you represent for the record?
Yes, I'd be happy to. My name is Karen Goldman. I am a retired municipal clerk, having worked for the city of Lakewood and for the city of Aurora for about 20 years. I now work with the Colorado Municipal League and the Colorado Municipal Clerks Association, primarily in the area of training municipal clerks. And I am here on behalf of the Colorado Municipal Clerks Association in support of House Bill 1071. When we as election administrators look at election bills, we look at it from the technical perspective. And that's how we have viewed this bill, through that lens. And we have decided that we like this bill. We like it for a number of reasons. First and foremost, we like it because the bill is voluntary. There is an opt-in provision that will allow for some municipalities who choose to do this type of voting to do it, while not requiring everybody to do it. We also like the fact that the bill takes a very measured approach to this type of voting, and that this voting will be used in races where there will be one elected person. I know there are a lot of people who would like to see it in multiple candidate races, or what we call at large, but for now we're very happy with the fact that it will be for the single voters only. We also like the fact that municipalities will be able to work with the county clerks on the education program, not just for our citizens, but also for our elected officials to help them work with their citizens. And as a person who does training for municipal clerks, I can guarantee you that the Municipal Clerks Association will take a very active role in training its members on how this process works. We like the fact that the implementation has been pushed out a bit. And after hearing from the Secretary of State office representative that this time frame might be too short, I don't see that we would oppose any amendment or any concerns with moving it out further. What we want to do is to make sure that enough time is devoted to the implementation, to creating the rules, and all the other things that are needed in order to make this work. And lastly, and probably most importantly, we really do like and appreciate the fact that the bill sponsors reached out to the municipal clerks and municipalities to ask our opinion and to allow us to have a seat at the table in this discussion. We like the bill. We certainly hope you'll like the bill. We hope you'll like the bill enough to support it, and we urge your support of House Bill 1071. And I'm very happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Ms. Goldman. Are there any questions for this witness? Seeing none, thank you, Ms. Goldman. Next up is Linda Templin. Ms. Templin, please state your name and who you represent for the record.
Hi, can you hear me?
We sure can.
Fantastic. My name is Linda Templin. I'm the Executive Director for Ranked Choice Voting for Colorado, and I am speaking in favor of this bill, and I thank the committee for allowing me to speak today. Much has already been said that I will not repeat, and it's fantastic to see so much community support for this bill. I'd like to thank the clerks in Colorado. There is a reason why Colorado leads the nation in reliable elections, and that is because the Colorado clerks are not afraid to innovate and to bring more voter-centered best practices to bear. Now, the reason that I am doing this work is twofold. There is that I have to, when I vote in elections large and small, but you know, look at city council, I have to see who's running, and when there is more than 3, I have to vote strategically. I have to see who is not only the closest to my viewpoint, but if there's more than one, I have to see which one has the most support, and I have to vote for that one to avoid splitting my vote. Well, what that does is it limits my political speech. It limits my political freedom just by having this old method that is now outdated. In our country, we use democracy 1.0. Many other countries have been using ranked choice voting to allow for greater political freedom. And it has been used in other nations as a peace building process to make sure that all the voices are heard and that no one has to resort to the political violence that, for instance, we saw on January 6th. And that is the other reason why I greatly support this is my prior work was supporting programs in a West African nation where they had had a civil war. And I know what it takes for a country to come back after a war, and it is no small thing. So when people start using glib language about, political struggles, and I don't know, an openness to other methods, it horrifies me. And I know that we have to do everything we can to build a better system where people know they are being heard and they are part of the process and do not resort to other methods. So that is why the team at RCV for Colorado has done so many reviews of the peer-reviewed information. We are working with political scientists who are indicating that this is the very best method to use. I'll point to Lee Jutman and the two-party doom loop as a good read on the topic. So with that, I again thank everybody so much for being part of this. A small minor point to bring up is that we municipal turnout changes are normally happen based on the initiative also on the ballot. That's what Minneapolis has told us. There are so many other cities running ranked choice around the nation that we have a good deal of data to use for the clerks to determine the best practices that are going to work for Colorado. So again, and I thank the clerks so very much for being open to innovation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Templin. Are there any questions from the committee for this witness? Seeing none, thank you, Ms. Templin. Next up is Matt Benjamin. Mr. Benjamin, please identify yourself for the record and who you represent.
Just to verify, you guys can hear me?
We sure can, Mr. Benjamin.
Wonderful. Thank you, Vice Chair and members of the committee for the opportunity to speak with you today. My name is Matt Benjamin. I live in Boulder. I greatly appreciate the comments from our mayor, Sam Weaver, and his evolution on this issue as he has learned more and seen the will of the voters of Boulder. I also want to point out that some of the testimony that has been given kind of what I would say misses the key point. And instead of debating perhaps the merits of RCV, it should be whether or not we agree as a state, certainly there's a committee and a house, whether we support local control and what that means for communities that want to choose their own fate and have the will of the voters decide the outcomes of their elections. I served as the campaign chair for Our Mayor, Our Choice. This was the Boulder ballot measure that Mayor Weaver mentioned that would allow Boulder voters to elect its mayor using instant runoff ranked choice voting. We intended this to start in 2023. And right now, the current timing of this bill works out very well that it would enable counties with supported legislation and guidance by the start of 2023. And that would be good timing for us to hopefully be able to implement our election by that November. Indeed, roughly 80% of Boulder voters said yes to this ballot measure. This is a clear mandate from our voters in our community that we want electoral change. And why is that? It's because partisanship has become toxic. And in Boulder, not by the way you normally think. We are a nonpartisan council election. It's not Republican or Democrats. This is a de facto two-party system that is baked into our current plurality voting system. It breeds this bifurcation in communities, and Boulder is showing that because we are nonpartisan and yet we are still divided. Opportunities like ranked choice voting work at undermining that dividedness and work to enable a greater understanding of what the majority of our community wants in terms of its elected officials. We need this legislation so that our county clerk can work with the city to facilitate fair and free elections. Enabling this enabling legislation does not force any community to take any action that its voters have not already authorized its election officials to take. This legislation further respects and empowers home rule municipalities to make the decisions that match the will of the people. Again, I strongly encourage you to vote yes on this bill, and hopefully that'll allow Boulder voters to be able to achieve the will that they so clearly demonstrated by voting yes on our ballot measure to elect our mayor using ranked choice voting. Thank you so much for your time, and I'm available for any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Mr. Benjamin. Are there any questions from the committee for this witness? Seeing none. The last witness we have signed up to call is no stranger, former Speaker Terrence Carroll. Are you there, former Speaker?
Yes, I am here. Can you hear me?
We sure can. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vice Chair, Mr. Chair, for this opportunity, members of the committee, for this opportunity to speak to you just briefly about House Bill 1071, and I am speaking in support of House Bill 1071. As referenced, my name is Terrence Carroll. I'm a former Speaker of the House, but today I am speaking as Executive Director of Unite Colorado. Unite Colorado is a movement of Democrats, Republicans, and Independents working to bridge the growing partisan divide and foster a more representative and functional government. We accomplish this by focusing on key electoral reforms that put voters first and make sure that voters have access to a functioning democracy. Ranked choice voting is one of those key electoral reforms that we support. Unite Colorado supports House Bill 1071 because this legislation puts voters first by allowing them to vote for and elect the candidate of their choice or candidates of their choice. I don't think there's much that I can add to many of the statements that have already been made today. I will simply add that this bill is important because it allows local municipalities to institute ranked choice voting and work with counties to make sure that ranked choice voting can be used in nonpartisan elections. At its crux, this is what local control is all about. Many people like to say that states are the laboratories of democracy. I would say that in Colorado, our municipal governments are laboratories of democracy, and they allow us to look at these evolving democratic norms to ensure that our democracy is truly representing the will of the people. I believe that House Bill 1071 will allow our cities working in conjunction with our counties and with our Secretary of State to implement ranked choice voting in those cities where the citizens have decided that they believe that ranked choice voting is the most efficient electoral system to elect members of the city council and the mayor of that particular city. You've heard all about the benefits of ranked choice voting, but I want to speak on just one key benefit that in my mind is very important, and the councilman from Aurora mentioned it just a little bit earlier. It ensures that the persons who are elected to an office are truly the people that have a mandate, a clear and unconvincing mandate from their citizens to hold that office. It ensures that someone who only gets 25% of the vote in a crowded field but yet wins election is not the person who comes to office. But it allows for a system where at the end of the day, we can say that the person who got 50% plus one is the person who has the mandate and will hold that office. It allows us to make sure that the words that we've seen over and over again in our country in an enlightenment democracy, that one person, one vote is truly that which is happening, not that you have a small minority of people who dictate what's happening for the larger group of people. Ranked choice voting allows for us to ensure that a majority of voters dictate and have their words heard and their votes matter, not a small minority that oftentimes could be extreme. This ensures that our whole community is invested, our whole community has had their voices heard, and that the person who is elected knows that the entire community or majority of the community has stood behind them and supports their platform and the direction that they want to lead in. So at this point, I will stop and ask if there are any questions that anyone has for me.
Thank you, Speaker Carroll. Are there any questions for this witness from the committee? Seeing none, thank you so much, Speaker.
Thank you.
All right, so that concludes everyone who signed up in advance to testify. Is there anyone in the room who has not signed up but who wishes to testify on House Bill 1071? Seeing no one else who wishes to testify, the testimony portion of the hearing is closed. Chairman Kennedy, the bill is on the table for amendment. Are there any amendments?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I believe 3 amendments have been distributed to the committee. We're going to look at them in order. So I will start by moving Amendment L3.
All right, is there a second?
Second.
Second by Representative Duran. Chairman Kennedy, please explain the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Amendment L3 is really just technical kind of alignment bill. We heard some feedback from our first stakeholder meeting. This was my pre-file bill, so we were under some pretty tight deadlines to get it out there. But after the municipal clerks and the county clerks had a chance to look at it, these were some of the things they suggested just to make sure it was technically correct and consistent, and that we, changed the terminology in all the appropriate places in statute. Before we call a vote on this one, I'd also like to move Amendment L4 to Amendment L3.
Second.
Is there a second? Second by Representative Duran. Chairman, please explain L004.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, members, for your patience with this. After the amendment was drafted and circulated on Friday evening, we had one more instance come to our attention that needed clarification to align with the rest of the bill.
Okay. Discussion from the committee on amendments L003 and L004. Seeing none, is there any objection to L003 or L004?
You need to do them separately before.
Oh, I do have to do them separately? All right, so apparently we have to do them separately. Is there any objection to L004? With none, it passes, right? All right, great. So, seeing no objections, the amendment is adopted without objection. Is there any objection to L003? Seeing no objections, the amendment is adopted without objection. Chairman Kennedy, on to L005.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move Amendment L5.
Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Rep. Duran. All right, Mr. Chair, please explain L005.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members, this amendment is intended to address the timing issue that Judge Choate from the Secretary of State's office brought up. The Secretary's staff has been working with me on some technical details throughout the process, but it wasn't until the end of last week that I had a chance to speak directly with the Secretary, who expressed some concerns about the speed of the rollout. I had initially thought that 2 years to develop everything was adequate, but as I've come to understand, there are a fairly limited number of software vendors out there who can do some of the work that needs to be done, and the Secretary's prerogative was making sure that we don't do anything before it's all the way ready to go. Her initial request of me was to delay the full implementation of the bill until 2024. However, as you heard before, the City of Boulder is doing a mayoral election using ranked choice voting in 2023. And even though I didn't run this bill for Boulder, in fact, I started working on this about a year before I came to realize that Boulder had such a ballot measure on their ballot last year. I am sensitive to their timeline and wanted to see if there were a way we could split the difference. And so what I came to realize was this. There are certain elements of what the Secretary of State is being tasked to do in this bill that do not take a lot of time. For them to go through the rulemaking process, for them to certify the new voting software and to test it and authorize counties to use it is not the hard part. And so that is something that could be done by 2023. However, there are certain things that become more complicated when you have a city that spans multiple counties. In those cases, the Secretary of State kind of performs the function of looking at the election results from the two counties together, doing an election night display and tabulation system, and then they're in charge of the risk limiting audit for those elections. And so what we thought would make the most sense is try to bifurcate this process so that everything that needs to be done for single county elections will be done ahead of the 2023 election, so that Boulder and any other cities that opt into this will be good to go in 2023. But for any cities that span multiple counties, they're going to have to wait 2 more years until 2025 so that we can finish completing these statewide processes. Now, I want to be clear about one thing in here. There is an audit process in place. So even though we won't have the new risk limiting audit up online by 2023, there is in Rule 26.10 of the election rules of Colorado, it specifies an alternative audit process that can be used. I'd be happy to answer any questions if people want me to dig into what that looks like, but it involves a manual recount of a select number of precincts to ensure that they can verify the results of the election. So I appreciate your indulgence on this. I do believe that this solves the timing issue that we heard from the Secretary of State's office, and I ask for your support.
Thank you, Chairman. Are there any comments or questions regarding the amendment? Representative Amabile. Pardon? Okay, yeah, this is just to the amendment. Are there any questions or comments regarding the amendment? Seeing none, is there any objection to Amendment L005? Seeing no objections, the amendment is adopted without objection. Committee members, are there any other amendments to the bill? Seeing none, the amendment phase is closed. Chairman Kennedy, would you like to make any concluding comments?
I would. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, committee members. I think a robust debate on this is warranted, and I am certainly open to answer any questions. I can speak to everything that Clerk Broerman brought up in his testimony. I'll speak to a few of them voluntarily, but if you wanted to dig in, I'm happy to answer any of those. They have not taken the same opposed position that he personally has taken. But I want to talk about this. I know I'm a Democrat. I know that I've been involved in campaigns, and many of you know that. But I do not believe that that's who's benefiting from this bill. I believe that this is just a better voting system. You know, if we rely on splitting the vote for our preferred candidate to win, that's an issue. You know, to give an example, I know this bill doesn't go into into partisan races, but if a Democrat was relying on a libertarian being in the race in order for the Democrat to win, that's not really the best system. That's not the right representative for that district necessarily. And unless the libertarian vote's second choices all go to that candidate. In these cases, I can tell you from my experience, it is a common conversation to have in nonpartisan municipal races about the spoiler candidate, about this third, or one side or the other freaks out thinking, oh my gosh, we have to get this candidate to step back. Those, first of all, are not appropriate conversations to be having. Anyone who wants to run for office should be able to. But in our current system, there is a real spoiler effect that happens. Secondly, there is a tendency to believe that you might be throwing your vote away if you cast your vote for a candidate who's not considered to be the most viable candidate. I've never thought that that was a particularly fair way to go, too. And so what I think with this bill is that it allows for our current our current ballot access systems to go forward, where candidates collect the signatures they need to get on the ballot, and as many candidates as want to run can, because then it will just be up to the voters to decide how it goes from there. I want to speak to the two jurisdictions that were mentioned that opted out of the system. I don't know all that much about Burlington, Vermont, but my understanding is that it had more to do with the results of that election than the process itself. With Aspen, however, it really was the process, and it's in part because a bill like this was not in place. When the city had to go it alone, rather than getting to work through their county and state infrastructure for running elections, that created a real problem for them. Now, I haven't spoken with the folks in Aspen, and I don't know if they have an interest in bringing this back, but they might once we get a state infrastructure up and running. Last but not least, I do want to talk about the money. I acknowledge that $1 million fiscal note is not a small thing, even if it is coming from the Department of State cash funds. And part of the reason the fiscal note is as high as it is because we concentrated some funds at the state to try to take it off the shoulders of the local governments. So for example, the software plugin that could be used, if the state negotiates a bulk-wide purchase, it's only $70,000 a year to make it available to the bulk of the counties in Colorado. So we made that policy choice to try to take that cost off the shoulders of the counties. All that said, I've had some conversations with Boulder where I know that they're very motivated to get this bill passed, because if it's not done, they're going to have to pay a lot more than that to run their own election. So I am exploring ways to bring down our fiscal note by having the secretary invoice the city of Boulder. I don't exactly know how you build a process like that. I'm not sure I've seen the state invoice cities for something like this before, but I'm exploring some options. This bill is routed to the Finance Committee in part because of the potential fee impact on businesses, and it will also be routed to the Appropriations Committee. So I intend to continue working on this because I believe there might be some ways to bring down the fiscal note. So all that said, I do really appreciate your time and the large number of witnesses. As you can see, there's a lot of support from activists of all political stripes who believe that this is just a better way to do elections. And I believe it is too, and I hope we can take this step forward for Colorado. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Are there any closing comments from the committee before we take final action? Representative Amaglia.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. And thank you, Rep. Kennedy, for bringing this bill. I am from Boulder, and the people in Boulder have spoken loud and clear that this is something they want. But I also just want to give you a little color of that. During the middle of this pandemic,
stood next to Matt Benjamin, who we heard from, gathering signatures. He was gathering them for this initiative. I was gathering signatures for a different initiative. And I watched people line up and wait to sign this petition, whereas my petition failed. And this, they demonstrated, was something that they absolutely wanted. And then they said that again during the election. And the time has come for us to expand our voting methods. And we can talk all we want about the details and about, you know, this line in the bill and that line in the bill. But the people out there don't care about that. What they want is to be able to have elections that they deem are going to give them a better result and a louder voice. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Amable. Are there any other comments from the committee? Seeing none, House Bill 1071 is recommended for routing to the Committee on Finance as amended with a favorable recommendation. Is there a motion? Chairman Kennedy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move House Bill 1071 as amended to the Committee on Finance.
Second by Representative Valdez. Mr. Dudley, please take the roll.
Representatives Amabile,
Yes.
Bacon,
Yes.
Burnett,
Yes.
Bockenfeld,
No.
Duran,
Yes.
Geithner,
No.
Hanks,
No.
Valdez,
Yes.
Williams,
No.
Woodrow.
Yes.
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
The motion to refer HB 1071 to the Committee on Finance passes on a vote of 8-3.
I believe it was 7-4, Mr. Chair.
I apologize. Correction, HB 1071, routed to the Committee on Finance as amended, passes on a vote of 7-4.
Thank you all.
You want me to do the rest? Yeah. Are there any announcements? None. Our next hearing will be Thursday, February 25th upon adjournment. The House State Civic Military Veteran Affairs Committee is adjourned. I'm not good at counting either, don't worry.